from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today's program is going to be a discussion of an exciting endeavor in the United States. It has to do with sending experienced Americans to Eastern Europe and to the former Soviet Union to work with these new governments to address economic and political developments and to permit them to delve into some of the programs and government entities that have been a success in this country. This is put on by the International Executive Service Corps with, I believe, over 10,000 people working in that capacity from time to time. And we're very, very fortunate to have on our program one of the individuals that's participated in this, and he's highly qualified to take those trips and to assist those governments and peoples. Our guest is Frank Henderson. He's had in the last 3 years 7 assignments and 9 trips under this program, and his background, as I've indicated, is certainly qualifying him to assist in these introductions to more democratic processes in that part of the world. Our guest is a journalist. He is the former mayor of Post Falls, Idaho, and he is the former chair of the county commissioners of Kootenai County, Idaho. And Frank, we're delighted to have you here, and we know that from all those years of your work and all your continuing after this time of experience to do this, you could just be relaxing, and yet you're contributing in this way. And I would tell our viewers that a year ago you started this last assignment. You went for a 6-week needs assessment to Central Siberia, and then you went back later for 2 months for the implementation, and then again later 6 weeks for the follow-up. And I would share with our viewers that you have been with us before, and you've been after this year's work kind to come, and we appreciate that. And we're going to talk about what's going on in the economic and political development.
Well, thank you. I'm always pleased to be here. Our trip to Siberia was one in which 8 teams of persons, myself and an educator, went to Siberia. 7 teams went to other cities in Russia. Our assignment was to assist local governments to find alternative ways to fund the education for what the Russians call kindergartens. We would call them daycare centers. But these kindergartens have been transferred to local government in recent years since the change in the Soviet Union to now the independence that they now are trying to succeed with. Previously, these kindergartens were funded by institutions and industries, not by the government. But now suddenly the governments have to find the money to pay for them. And it's like in the United States, the unfunded mandates cities and counties have received through the years. Now the Russian government's suffering the same problem, and so they need to find ways to pay for this program.
Well, that's a wonderful introduction to what you were doing, and I'm going to have Janelle Burke, who's a regular panelist and attorney at Idaho, to join us, and we'll let her continue to pursue this charge that you were given and carried out in Central Siberia.
And where exactly did you go? We've said Central Siberia, but you can explain perhaps more clearly where that was.
Well, if you can picture a map of Russia with Moscow here and the Pacific Ocean here, Central Siberia and the city where I was, Krasnoyarsk, is exactly midpoint. It's 2,500 miles to Moscow, 2,500 miles to the city of Vladivostok on the Pacific.
That's vast, very vast. How many people were living in this city?
The city of Krasnoyarsk is about 1 million people. And we were surprised. We expected when we were assigned to Siberia that we would find cold Arctic conditions, but that was not at all true. It was a modern city, very industrial, and we were surprised to find out that its technological base was huge, and it was huge by design. In World War II, Krasnoyarsk started to grow because the Russians moved defense industries there to place them out of reach of the German army. Then during the Cold War, they established many technical programs there, including nuclear in their space program, so that they are out of reach of people who wanted to spy on them. And certainly it is a secluded area, and I'm sure that part succeeded very well.
I have told our staff to get ready for this, Frank. Our viewers always like to see some visuals of where you've been, although most of our program today is to talk about the actual program, how you implement it. And so I'm going to ask our director to bring up on the screen some photographs. I believe we have about 10 that so our viewers get a taste of where you were and what it looked like, and if you would walk us through those as they appear on the screen.
Oh, I'd be glad to do that. It's a very interesting area. Almost all of the shopping that you do in a place like Siberia or even other cities in Russia, you'll find there are no stores, very few stores. And so everything is sold at an open market. And here a young Russian lady is modeling a fur hat. That happens to be a silver fox hat that she has. And you find the general public all wear hats of this type, men and women alike.
Because it's very cold there, isn't it?
It does get cold. And here, now prospective brides would be interested in this. This was taken in January, and that's snow on the ground. And those look like snowmen. That's not snowmen. That's an exhibit of bridal gowns. And so if you're a prospective bride, you put on your fur hat and fur coat, and you go to this open market and you pick out your bridal gown. And they do have a little tent there that you can go try things on in.
So they're hardy.
This is a picture. I conducted a one-day seminar in another city, and on the left of that picture is a lady by the name of Natalia Vanova. She was the vice mayor of the city of Minusинsk. I did a one-day program there to work with their staff on the same subject of financing public services. On my right is the lady who was my translator, Laura, and I cannot even pronounce her last name, but Laura is a marvelous person. She taught English for 12 years at a university, but this was at that seminar.
A lot of Russians do speak English, don't they?
Yes, and this Russian, this lady here, this is Natalia Vanova. We're conferring, and she spoke English very well. It amazes me that so many of them could speak English.
And that makes your work easier too, if you don't have to use the interpreter.
Somewhat. Now, we've seen this all through Eastern Europe and Russia. This is a lady, a mother from somewhere down in the southern part of Russia. They migrate throughout the area, and in that red covering on her lap is a baby, a very young baby. And she sits on a piece of cardboard. She's sitting on ice on the sidewalk, and she begs all day. And you walk by, and she waves her hand like this, and they are asking for you to put money in their hands.
Yes.
This is another open-air shopping. That happens to be my wife, Lillian, with the jacket on in the back. This is a display of newspapers, and if you look very closely at those round rolls in the foreground, this same merchant sells newspapers, and he also sells rolls of toilet paper.
Well, again, it's right out in the open in the middle of the winter, and looks very, very cold.
It was cold. The temperature got to 25 below and stayed there, except when it got a little colder, and I think the coldest we had was about minus 35. But surprisingly, you get used to it. And here you can see, this is out behind the apartment where we lived. You can see the ice on the birch trees behind us and how my wife is bundled up. It did get cold, and if you walked for 15 or 20 minutes, the muffler that she was wearing would be covered with frost and icicles, and men who have mustaches and beards definitely develop icicles within a few minutes of being outside.
And their winters are quite long, aren't they? The growing season's short in that part of the world.
Yeah, it's longer than our winter. Winter lasts through April over there. This picture was taken on the top of a hill near where we lived. That's myself in the city of Krasnoyarsk in the background. And you can see one of the problems. Their industries are still dirty. You can see the smog overlaying the city. That is the city behind me. You can't see it because of the industrial smoke. And they just need a lot of help. They know it. The rank and file people are very concerned about their environment. They just don't have money, and they don't have the technology yet to implement programs to clean things up.
But I'm sure that they're pleased that people like you come to give them ideas and to assist.
Yes, they are. They're really grateful. They just need money, and unfortunately, they don't have enough. Now, this boat is a very historic boat. It happens to be now a museum. In 1897, Lenin was exiled from the Soviet Union to a gulag up north of where we were located. The body of water there is the Yenisei River, a huge river which flows north to the Arctic Ocean, and it stays open almost all year round. But Lenin was transported on this very boat to the gulag, where he was assigned for 3 years, and it is now a museum.
Yes, there's a lot in history about that, and how the whole political world was affected by his return when it was. That he wasn't expecting some of the activity to happen as fast as it did, but he did come back. And
now this is a picture of the final day of a seminar, of a training program that we conducted for all kindergarten directors and accountants. And this is a graduation ceremony. It's really hard to see there, but that's myself in the front with a white shirt, and we're giving diplomas to the various people who attended this seminar.
Well, again, that was just most interesting, and I know our viewers appreciate having some visual aids. I want to talk a little bit more, if we go back to Janelle, about the economic and political conditions. You and I have had the privilege of sitting over dinner, and I was able to get some of this information. I also thank you for bringing back the book that you brought to me about the development of their local governments. Share with our viewers, Frank, what is the conditions? You alluded to that already a little bit, but are you optimistic or are you pessimistic about it's my understanding they're trying to do two things at the same time. They're trying to create a new structure of government that has some form of a democratic process after not having that experience all these many years. And then secondly, how that is corresponding with trying to create a more economically stable society. What is your view of what is happening, and are you optimistic?
I don't know if I'm optimistic or pessimistic. I do my best to be realistic. I believe realistically it is going to take many years. What I have found that are impedances to their progress, the things that slow them down, is simply a lack of understanding of how does free enterprise work? How should a democratic government work? How should a democratic government and free enterprise work together? I find they have totally no understanding of what a public-private partnership is, how government should in many ways work with industry, how industry should understand the problems of government and work with government. That kind of cooperation does not exist. Now, I try to promote it. Other people like myself try to promote it. But frankly, they've lived in this socialist system and this doctrine for so long, it has become part of their culture. And to change it is just really difficult. So where I find the hope and I find the optimism is in the students and in some of the intellectual portion of the society. While I was there, I was invited to speak to an economics class at the university, and I presented a series of 3 lectures on the subjects of economic development, business and government. Those students were really eager, and I found they were quite well informed. And I don't believe that major change or major success will be realized until a growing number of those students graduate and then become employed out in the industry and start to implement the government and make it all work together for the common good. I believe it is going to take that long, maybe a generation.
But we've seen that in other places in history where democracy grew over a long period of time, and so it has its chance, and there are some roots there, isn't there?
Oh yes, and I think if we study our own history in the United States, our first 50 years or so weren't very smooth. No. We had difficulties, lots of difficulties.
Janelle Burke.
I want to ask you some questions about the infrastructure. You were there working on the infrastructure, as a matter of fact, but some questions with regard to the infrastructure. What about roads in the area, and how are they paid for?
Well, the roads are in poor repair. They're serviceable. A huge amount of traffic is handled by them. The streets and roads in the city all need repair. All need repair. Curbs are broken down. Sidewalks are broken. Huge potholes exist in the streets. Even sometimes you drive down a road and a manhole cover is missing from that big round hole. It just is beyond belief that they would tolerate that. But they don't have money to correct it. And part of what I do is to suggest to them ways to get money to correct it. They don't, for instance, they don't have license plates. They don't collect money from a fee for a license plate. They don't collect fees from trucks for their heavy weight that goes like we do in the United States. They do not assess federal or state or local taxes on the purchase of fuel. And when I tell them that how we do that in the United States, that yes, there is a sales tax on fuel, and it goes to a dedicated account that may only be used to build or repair roads. You can see the light bulbs coming on, and they start to understand how special fees like that, when dedicated to a specific purpose, can be be used for the public good. That's just an easy example of how they have no concept of how government can work to serve the public.
Before the show, we talked a little bit about income tax there. Can you explain what their rate is and then what the result is of the high tax rate?
Well, first of all, the people don't make very much money, and they're not rated like we are. They're not graduated by their income for their level of tax like we are. Everybody that's employed simply pays 42% of their salary. Well, they never see it. It just goes to the central government, which happens to be in Moscow, and then some of that is refunded back to the local government. The employer also pays, I believe the rate is 17% as a payroll tax, and that goes to the central government. And some of that, not a lot, of that comes back. So their net take-home pay is quite small, and their salaries are small, and so in a family, husbands and wives both work. They may even work a third job, which is a nighttime job where there is no payroll. They simply are paid in cash, so they don't have to pay taxes. And a lot of this just needs to be corrected before they can be successful.
Another part of the infrastructure is the housing. What kind of housing did you find there?
Well, this was part of the Soviet Union, that everyone was equal. You just didn't have prominent individuals. There's very little single-family housing. It is all in that monolithic apartment-type building, concrete. The building we lived in was 9 stories tall. Every apartment was the same. Basically 3 rooms plus the bathroom. They don't have bedrooms like we conceive of a bedroom where a bed is there and it's fully made up all the time. They just have a room that has a pad, which at night lifts up and you take out the bedclothes and put it on there, and that becomes the place where people sleep. My next door neighbor was chairman of the mathematical faculty at the highest institute there, university. And he was an academician of the highest order. He lived in exactly the same kind of apartment we did, and everybody else did. Everybody's equal.
Now, in terms of education, and that's one of the things that you were there to deal with, was the care of young children. What did you find to be the problems that were in the way of doing the kinds of things that you would have liked to have done?
Well, the problems in the way were people, was the administrators, the people in the central office of the city, where I was they said, frankly, they thought they had enough good ideas of their own. They didn't want any more. And so we had a lot of resistance, but we were sent there by people who had given them a huge grant to assist them in education. And so they had to tolerate us, frankly, and that's what they did. So the greatest difficulty were the people in charge of the program. The greatest strength that I found were the teachers themselves and the administrators themselves who worked directly with the children. They were wonderful. Their programs were marvelous. There wasn't anything about their daycare programs that we could criticize, that we would be proud to bring them back to the United States. A marvelous program. I talked to kids in kindergarten that could speak to me in English. Sometimes they'd have a teacher who just, as a special project, would have an English class for these, and they take kids in as young as 2 years old, and they have them until they're 7 when they start what we would call first grade.
Let me interrupt just for a second to let our viewers know that if they've joined our program in progress, our guest is Frank Henderson, who is one of about 10,000 people who are working in places like Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union through the International Executive Service Corps to help them with their economic and political development. And with that, I'll let Janelle continue.
The very last part of the question that I had was the reason that so many children are in daycare or kindergarten, as it's called in Russia, or in the area that you were in, that town in Siberia, is because both parents are working. Is that correct?
Oh, that is absolutely true.
With that, Frank, I'd like to continue on what I'd call kind of some examples or case studies of, again, some of the things that you saw that really underscores the need for this kind of consulting. In the field of budgeting, you talked a little earlier in the program about taxes and so forth, but give us some idea of, as a person yourself who's had an awful lot of experience with budgeting processes, what some of their greatest lack of knowledge is on how to even deal with this earmarking of funds.
They just need to start with the fundamentals, which is what I tried to do when I was there. And I learned that in their budgeting for their schools, for the kindergarten specifically, that the people directly involved with the expenditure of money were not involved in establishing the budget ahead of time. They were not asked what are your needs. They were not asked what is your enrollment going to be for next year. They were not asked what improvements you have to make on your building. They were not asked anything. It was the people in charge in the central government that simply said, this is your budget. And it was unrealistic. And so, let's say for the people in charge, they don't know the system of budgeting that they should use. They don't understand how beneficial it would be. They don't understand how it would help them conserve money. And they just frankly don't understand. So the workshop we conducted, the training workshop, was designed to help start a new pattern of thinking.
So one of the things missing is priorities. That there may be one school or one whatever entity that is that has more dilapidated buildings and needs more funds. Another school might get, or organization might get funds that doesn't have that same kind of problem. It sounds like to me that they're not looking at it from that perspective.
No, their view is just not realistic, doesn't address the needs and doesn't address the future.
For so long, they had a one-party system, a communist system, a socialist system that was authoritarian. Now that has disintegrated and the Soviet Union's broken into these different countries, such as Georgia and Russia. And Russia is, of course, the big one. What do you see on the political horizon? Parties are beginning to flourish, or the people are excited about joining different. There's more than the two-party system. There's a multi-party system.
There are several parties there, and frankly, it left me a little confused. Where I was, the public there predicted Yeltsin would be reelected, which he was. Where I was, they distinctly did not want the communists reelected. But where I was, there was a young Russian, and I don't know his name, who was the most popular, but he did not win any of the early elections, so he was not in the final running. But he was a younger fellow. He was a man who was respected by students, especially by the younger generation. So you have this politically, you have this major split of the older people who remember how comfortable they were. They didn't have any opportunity, they didn't have incentives, they didn't have any money, but they were all taken care of during the Soviet system. Now with free enterprise, frankly, they're worse off economically, and so they wished the day had returned that communism would come back. So they favored people along that political line of thinking.
Well, I see that they're probably in transition, and even the struggle over Yeltsin's winning is he was not doing very well with the older generation, but he was with younger people and also people that were at what we call professional occupations and were moving up the ladder. My next question then would have to do with, there's not only this transition between age groups and society almost breaking into different economic conditions, but would you not also, or would you respond to the fact that are they also having to, as they move to a very, very different economic system, it's complicated by what you're already talking about. That change alone is a major undertaking for a country, but secondly, not having the knowledge of how to do it even increases the chances that there will be risked about whether it would survive or not.
Oh, they have many business failures simply because same reason we have business failures. Some people are undercapitalized. They don't have enough money to begin with. They don't have the fiscal staying power. Most of them have good technical knowledge. But their biggest failure is they don't have the marketing knowledge. They don't know how to sell the products. And you see in the Soviet system, they never had to sell anything. They didn't have salesmen. They didn't know how to ask for an order. They don't know how to produce advertising. There's so many things that they have to learn. But frankly, I saw some evidence that some people were learning it, in fact. And there are some successes over there. Some of them are American-based. Coca-Cola, very successful. Pepsi-Cola just came in to challenge them. So they're there with Russian partners, and they are being successful. So gradually, they'll start to see the successes and learn how to manage their businesses.
And understand the concept of competition.
Absolutely.
Coca-Cola and Pepsi would be a good example for them.
Mm-hmm.
Something else we've heard a lot about on the national media programs, and it came up in the elections that were held there. That has to do with the black market and organized crime and so forth. What did you observe, and is that going to be a very serious problem and obstacle to this change?
It will continue to be a problem. We saw it every day on the street. You could see They call it the mafia. That's what I called it, was the mafia. I don't know why. They always wore black leather jackets and dark hats, and they looked like the mafia. But they ran all the currency exchange offices. They were usually the people that you had to get business permits from. They were people who facilitated whatever had to be done on a business basis. They were the people who gave you what you would call protection, or you bought protection for them so your place of business didn't get vandalized. And it's going to take a while till they get past that, but right now it's being tolerated, and frankly, I don't know what they can do about it.
Then it must be just out in the open, the government's aware of it, and they're not
Absolutely.
addressing it.
We saw them every day in the street. They didn't cause us trouble because we weren't competing with them. We weren't causing them trouble.
Janelle Berg.
Our time is short, but I want to ask about the large companies that existed in the town that you were living in. Were they healthy? And if so, what kinds of things were they doing for the future?
No, they're not economically not healthy. No, they had a huge electronics manufacturing company there, previously made radios for the military. Well, they just don't have a good consumer market there at the moment, but they can develop it. They have the technical knowledge, but they don't yet have the marketing skills. There were companies, major companies there that employed 2,000 to 3,000 people that manufactured electronic switching equipment. That market is hard to define and to convert over to consumer. There was an aluminum manufacturing company there, much like Kaiser Aluminum, and they were continuing to be successful. There was a company that manufactured vehicle tires, and they were being successful. Then Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, big pharmaceutical company, barely existing. So they're in this transition phase. Some will succeed, some won't.
Frank, it's my understanding that you may go back again. Like I've said, over the 3 years you've been on 7 assignments, and you've been to other countries like Hungary, and you also went to the Ukraine. And so we want to have you back, and we want you and your wife to come back and talk about the social aspects, and we will ask you to do that at a future date. But on behalf of Janelle Berg and our staff, we want to thank you very much for taking this time. It's been very, very informative, and I know our viewers have appreciated it. Thank you so much.
It's always a pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, as I've indicated, our guest has been Frank Henderson, who has assignments with the International Executive Service Corps, going to Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union to work on political and economic development. And I know, as I said to him just now, that you have found this interesting and very informative, and we're so pleased we have this opportunity to bring guests like Mr. Henderson to you on these very important subjects. I would invite you to be with us again next week, and we will discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.